Welcome to New Era School Notes for Studies.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really critical moment in African history, the 1964 Malawi cabinet crisis. Just think about it for a second. A country wins its independence, there are celebrations in the streets, and then, just weeks later, the very heroes who won that freedom are at each other's throats. It's a fracture that would set Malawi's course for the next 3 decades. And that question really is what this whole story is about. The crisis in Malawi is such a powerful example of the challenges that came with post-colonial nation building. It shows how that unity, the kind forged in a common struggle, can just dissolve under the real-world pressures of actually governing a country. So to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. We'll start with the return of a hero, then look at the cracks that started to show, the big showdown in the cabinet, how the nation split, and finally, the long-term legacy of it all. Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off with this incredible promise of freedom. We're in the British colony of Nyasaland, and the air is just buzzing with this growing nationalist energy, a movement dead set on ending colonial rule. You can see here the road to independence happened incredibly fast. The real catalyst was back in '53, when the British tried to impose this federation, which people really opposed. Then, in 1958, the movement gets its figurehead, Dr. Hastings Banda. He'd been out of the country for over 40 years. The younger politicians, they saw him as the key to getting the masses on side. And they were right. His party won a massive victory in '61, and that just paved the way for independence in July of 1964. But, and this is a huge but, that unity was kind of built on a big misunderstanding. See, the young, more radical ministers who brought Banda home, they thought he'd be a sort of respected elder statesman, a figurehead. Banda? He saw himself as the leader, full stop. And this clash over who was really in charge quickly blew up into major disagreements about policy. And this slide, this is where you can see those two completely different visions from Malawi just colliding. On one side, you have Banda. His style was autocratic, very cautious. He famously said, "I alone make policy." He was building ties with apartheid South Africa, and he was deliberately slowing down the promotion of Africans into senior government jobs. His ministers, though, they wanted the exact opposite. They believed in collective leadership, in Pan-African solidarity, and they wanted rapid Africanization so people could actually see and feel the benefits of being independent. The ministers' fears were perfectly summed up by one of their own, Dunduzu Chisiza, who wrote this just a couple of years before the crisis. He basically warned that a leader who gets used to having absolute authority during a freedom struggle could easily become a dictator if they aren't willing to be challenged after independence. His words turned out to be tragically accurate. So, as you can probably guess, these tensions couldn't stay behind closed doors for long. They finally just boiled over in August 1964. All that hope and unity from the independence celebrations in July was gone, replaced by a really bitter political fight. And look at how fast it all fell apart. It all started on August 26th, when the ministers laid out their grievances to Balunda in a cabinet meeting. But instead of talking it out, Balunda just retaliated. On September 7th, boom, he fires 3 of them. In response, 3 more ministers quit out of loyalty to their friends. And then, the very next day, Balunda takes it to Parliament to force a vote of confidence, basically to crush the rebellion for good. Now, you might be wondering, how did he win that vote so easily? Well, the truth is, it wasn't a fair fight. The system itself was stacked in his favor. Banda had personally handpicked every single member of his party in that parliament. Their loyalty was to him, not to their cabinet colleagues. So the ministers who disagreed, they never really stood a chance. The vote was overwhelmingly in Banda's favor. But that vote in Parliament, that wasn't the end of it. Not at all. It was really just the beginning of the next phase, a much more violent one. Once the political route was shut down, the conflict spilled out of the government buildings and onto the streets. There were some last-minute attempts at reconciliation, led by the British Governor General, but they went nowhere. In the city of Zomba, where the ex-ministers had a lot of support, violent clashes broke out between the two sides. And then, in a huge symbolic act, protesters burned down the national headquarters of Banda's own political party. At that point, facing threats and with their power base gone, the ministers really had no choice. By October, most of them had fled the country for safety in Zambia and Tanzania. But even going into exile didn't stop the fight entirely. A couple of the former ministers tried to fight their way back. In 1965, Henry Chippembere led a small rebellion from inside the country, but it was put down pretty quickly. Then, 2 years later, NTCHEU tried to lead a tiny guerrilla force in from Mozambique. That also failed, and Chicism is killed in the process. These were really the last gasps of any armed resistance. So, what was the fallout from all of this? Well, the consequences of the crisis and those failed rebellions were huge and immediate. They completely changed Malawi's political future, really setting it on a specific path for the next 30 years. And this really brings home the brutal personal cost for those who stood up to Banda. Henry Chippembere died in exile. NTCHEU was killed. Orton Shirwa was actually abducted from another country and brought back to die in a Malawian prison. Of all these key figures, only a few, like Kanyama Chiume, managed to survive long enough to see Banda's rule finally end in 1994. And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway. The crisis paved the way for a dictatorship. With all of his rivals either eliminated, killed, or in exile, there was nobody left inside the country to check his power. So he moved fast to make his control official, declaring Malawi a one-party state in 1966, and then, in 1971, making himself president for life. So this whole story leaves us with a really difficult question, one that many new nations faced then and still face today. For a new country, what's more important? Strong, unified leadership to create stability, or the freedom for people to disagree? What the Malawi cabinet crisis shows us is that when a leader demands absolute unity, and when they treat any kind of dissent as an act of treason, the result can be a tragic loss of talent, and ultimately, the suppression of democracy itself. It's a profound legacy that truly forged a nation.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. We are also on Facebook and TikTok. Just scan the QR. This is Victoria signing out. Peace.